podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
So, I'm aware I owe you a couple of podlets, but I thought I'd wait until the quarterfinals were completely done, which they are now. I'm recording this on Thursday morning, New York time. Probably the most bleary-eyed I have been at any point in this trip, because Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner finished just before 3 a.m. last night. I'm looking at a press conference transcript that says 3:40 a.m. on it. I don't know if Carlos Alcaraz has ever done such a late press conference, but yeah, I don't even think those statistics exist, which is why I don't know, but I can't imagine he's done many later local time. Funnily enough, I do remember that Carlos Alcaraz's big sort of breakthrough win, or maybe his first ATP Tour win, was against Albert Ramos Vinolas in Rio de Janeiro back in 2020, February 2020. And that match it started around midnight and it was around 3 hours. So that actually might not have been far off. Maybe people who were watching it live, or some of our Brazilian listeners who might have been there, can maybe remember exactly what time Alcaraz finally finished that one off. But needless to say, as he's proven this week against Marin Cilic, a match that finished at 2:30 in the morning, or 2:24 I think technically, and then tonight, or last night I should say, against Jannik Sinner when he finished at 2:50 in the morning, is that Carlos Alcaraz may be 19, but he doesn't mind going up past bedtime. I guess we'll talk about the tennis first, because it was a really good match, a really thrilling match. Those who lasted the whole thing really got their money's worth, to say the least, and really enjoyed it, I'm sure. Not everyone did, not even half of them did, but I suppose credit to those who managed it. I had some friends who were there for Alcaraz Cilic, and I think they left at 1 a.m. because they had to go to work in the morning. This was played on a Wednesday night, and it's just after the long Labor Day weekend, which is traditionally the end of the summer. Almost everyone's going back to work at the moment, so everyone had to go home and sleep, which eventually we all did as well. There were so many points that I wrote down and said point of the match in my notes. I think I put it down 5 times, but the first one was 2-2 in the first set, deuce I think. And what I love about Jannik Sinner is that he is aggressive, but he's kind of the opposite of Carlos Alcaraz. They're both very aggressive players, but Sinner is kind of aggressive in a more orthodox and almost like regimented way, whereas Alcaraz is a bit more flary. And so at this point kind of summed it up. Sinner made a really lovely low volley at the net, which for a guy who looks like he shouldn't be able to make good low volleys, because of the shape of him and the sort of lankiness and the limbs, was really impressive. And then Alcaraz ran it down, he lobbed him and landed it. And I think if it were Alcaraz chasing that down, he'd have hit the tweener, and maybe that would have worked. Sometimes it does. But Sinner kind of ran back and just did the sort of turn around, spin around to hit the forehand, and he ripped up the back of it and hit it cross court across the front of Alcaraz and landed the passing shot. I don't, to be honest, I don't think he would have got there. He looked a little bit like he left it, but I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have got there even if he tried. It was a fabulous pass, and it kind of, the crowd were already really up for it because both players had broken in the first 4 games. Sinner actually, I think, probably came out pretty nervous. He'd gone to 5 sets with Altmaier in the first round. He'd gone to 5 sets with Ivashka in the 4th round. And that Ivashka match, he hit 14 double faults. Which, over 5 sets isn't mega, but it's still quite a lot. And he hit 3 in the first game and missed a forehand to kind of drop the first game on serve. And I just worried a bit whether that was a sign of nerves. But he settled pretty quickly. The first serve was a problem the whole first set. I think he had 56% first serve percentage in that first set. Which, isn't really going to get it done against a guy who's going to out-rally you quite a lot as well. But he definitely picked it up. So, Alcaraz took that first set, inevitably. I think he broke 3 times within it. And the thing that really made the difference in the second set was that Sinner picked up his first serve in a big way. And actually, the real moment for me was maybe not the moment of the match, but and I will praise Alcaraz in a minute too. But I wanted to say some things about Jannik Sinner because, as the loser, you're always going to get talked about less. Is he went love 40 down, serving at 5-6, which frankly was just mostly the product of some really good returning from Carlos Alcaraz, who's more than capable of that. And most of the night, he returned really well. Frankly, as did Sinner. But yeah, so he went love 40 down, 5-6. That is set point to go 2 sets down against Carlos Alcaraz. That is good night Vienna, or whichever European city you would prefer. And he landed 5 first serves in a row, and big first serves. The first 4 unreturned. And then the 5th one, I mean, it's in the ad court, and he hits it out wide, and Alcaraz just about gets it back, and he makes the approach shot, kind of, the classic +1 forehand, having served out wide, hit the forehand then inside in, and make him scamper across and hopefully not get there. He actually ran past it, and then hit the behind-the-back shot, which we all know. He struck it pretty well. Sinner made the volley, and then Alcaraz runs the ball down and makes the pass. Like, it's just... The speed of the guy is unreal. The shot making all very impressive, but the physicality of him is really spectacular. Not to mention the fact that when he does this stuff, he then sticks his finger up in the air or his arm up in the air and conducts the crowd brilliantly. He had another set point in that game, Alcaraz, when it looked like he'd made the lob, but then Sinner kind of plays the backhand overhead, and Alcaraz missed the put away, and then Sinner got out the game. He served and volleyed at deuce, which he'd barely done in the match, and then got another serve in, and Alcaraz nets the return, and so forcing the tiebreak. But it made me realise how, Jannik Sinner's second serve is clearly a problem, but his first serve can be, when it's right and under pressure, I mean, really incredible. And I think that's a big plus for the future of Jannik Sinner, who I think he's 11th in the live rankings, but I've no doubt he will spend a lot of time in the top 10. And I probably did doubt that a little bit at times over the last 18 months. Excuse me for a second. Because it's raw, these podlets, you get the coughs, unfortunately, and it's been a long 2 weeks so far. But yeah, that kind of clutch serving is what kind of stands out among really top players, and I think that's going to stand him in very good stead. And you know what, it's a great first serve, it really is. So all good on that front. But yeah, forced a tiebreak, which. I think there were... So it was a 16-point tiebreak. And off the top of my head, I think there were 9, maybe 10 winners. I mean, it was really high quality. And to be honest, from the kind of rallying point of view, it was a really high quality match. I know there were lots of breaks of serve, but, I think that maybe says a lot about how good the rallying was, because, Alcaraz doesn't do a lot on first serve, frankly. I think it's getting better, but I think when I spoke to Ferrero, when he was still only 17, the big thing he said was like, well, the backhand needs a bit of work, and the first serve at the moment is not where we need it to be. And that's that. I don't know if that remains true, but it's definitely an area he can improve. But also, it's like, well, he just backs himself to out-rally anyone, so what's the problem? Anyway, it's something we might talk about with Calvin when we do a full pod later, hopefully this weekend. And then we got into the third set, another kind of absurd game, this time at 6-5, with Alcaraz trying to serve out the set. I mean, this is the thing as well, is that, Sinner then won the tiebreak 7-love, shut him out. One ridiculous pass, I think at 4-love, Alcaraz hits the sort of inside-in approach shot, and Sinner's a good... 6, 8, 10 feet behind the baseline, and he and on the stretch, and hits this cross-court forehand pass that was just crazy. And yeah, he shut out the tiebreak, and he also broke a really good return game, actually, against at 6-5 when Alcaraz was over the set, and he broke back, having just been broken at 5-all. Both of them, I would say, were really good return games. I wouldn't have faulted the servers again there. I would say that both of them returned really well. But yeah, so all of a sudden, Alcaraz sits down, or he goes off court, 2-1 down. It's 1 a.m, and he's won more points. He's ahead on almost every statistic, he had 5 set points in the second set. He served for it in the third, and yet he's 2-1 down. He has to go 5, and I think mentally, that is tough, really tough not to let that get to you. And if I'm honest, I think it probably did get to him for a little bit. Sinner broke him in the first game of the fourth set and looked pretty in control and served for the match. Alcaraz was looking a bit lost. At one point he said to his box, "Tell me what to serve, I don't know where to serve." He did look lost. He was sort of straining his neck and his teeth like a sort of frustrated teenager, and they just can't quite understand what's going on, or they're just too full of hormones. Not that necessarily he was, but he was really frustrated. He had chances on the Sinner serve at 2-1, and then when Sinner finally served for the match at 5-4, he served really well on the first break point, bombed down an ace at 30-40, and he had match point advantage Sinner, and he misses his sort of backhand +1, and I think it was fairly makeable, and once you're into the rally it's anyone's game. But I think that will sit with him for a while, that one, that opportunity. He also missed a forehand, I think, at 3-2, 40-30 in the third set, which, I think he obviously won the third set anyway, but he mentioned it, which I thought was significant. He said afterwards, it would hurt, which of course it would. I think this one will hurt for quite a while, but tomorrow today I wake up trying to somehow take only the positives, try to take the other part away. But it's tough, for sure. Next tournament I'll play Davis Cup before I want to practice again in the best possible way, try to improve. Maybe next time I can win this. No? It was a very high level for sure. It was a good match, I hope also for the spectators. Yeah, last time I won, this time he won. That's it. I think that's a pretty resilient attitude for a guy who served for the match, lost in 5 sets, and then sits down 10 minutes later in front of the press. I think that's pretty darn impressive. The fifth set, the level continued, really. I couldn't believe neither of them really looked tired. That was a ridiculous thing. And they both played a lot of tennis in this tournament. It was the second longest match in US Open history. It went past 5 hours. It was the latest finish in US Open history by 25 minutes. And then Alcaraz serves it out at 5-3. And you do just look in awe at these kids. I wrote a long thing yesterday and today, depending on exactly what time zone you're in, talking about how Nick Kyrgios will, kind of bridge the gap between the GOAT era and this new era. And to be honest, Alcaraz and Sinner are there, and Alcaraz is a pretty big star. Sinner isn't such a big star, but he's getting there. But they won't play each other at every tournament, and they are only 2 players. And to be honest, the matches that Alcaraz has played against other people in this tournament haven't been like ratings busters. The Brooksby match was fun to watch. The Baez match in the first round was fun to watch. Obviously, the Cilic thing was long, and parts of it were good to watch. But he's not quite yet this standalone superstar. Whereas Kyrgios, because he's been around longer, basically, he has this sort of bank of people who know who he is and people who know he's entertaining. And not everyone has been converted to the Carlos Alcaraz scripture yet. So that will take time. It'll take time with Jannik Sinner. But, these guys hopefully are going to play 55 times over the next 15 years, and hopefully in major finals. And someone said it on Twitter that this looks and feels like the new Federer and Nadal, and that's a lot of pressure to put on, this sort of rivalry, and it's a big ask, but it's already, the tennis is amazing. The tennis is really amazing. And lovely that they're both aggressive and willing to come forward and willing to try things. Calvin often says that he doesn't like the Nadal-Djokovic rivalry because actually it's a bit sort of baseline sluggy, and I kind of get it. But I do think that this is so watchable and will continue to be so watchable. And yeah, I mean, long live Alcaraz and Sinner, quite frankly. You could tell it was high quality as well because all the players were watching it. Like, some of the doubles guys were there, had hung around to watch it. I saw Edouard Roger Vasselin, who had played mixed. I think he's in the mixed final, maybe. He was there right to the end in front row seats. Coco Gauff said she was getting a flight at 6 a.m, but she stayed up till 2:30, 10 to 3 to watch it. Feliciano Lopez was tweeting about it. Stan Wawrinka, players were really into this match because they know a good match when they see one, and probably they knew a good match when they saw it on the draw sheet as well. So, what a great match. I'm sure we'll talk about it with George and Calvin as well, but a real pleasure to be there, even if I am now absolutely exhausted. The other results from yesterday, just to kind of fill you in on, Francis Tiafoe battered Andrei Rublev, quite frankly. Straight sets. Really sad to see Rublev in tears in his chair at one of the change of ends as it was just slipping away. I think that's 6 Grand Slam quarterfinals for him now, and he's lost all 6 of them. He is someone who's very harsh on himself on the court, and he says he's working on that, but it's also been a very tough year for him. He was the guy who wrote "No War" on a camera, I think in Doha, when the invasion of Ukraine first kicked off, and he did that amazing kind of elongated interview with a Russian blogger whose name escapes me, which Daria Kazatkina kind of took all the headlines because she talked about being gay and being in a same-sex relationship and everything that went with that. But Rublev talked a lot in that documentary as well, and talked about his own struggles and what was hard about that. So yeah, you sort of want Rublev's season to end now in some ways because I think the guy needs some decompression time. But he'll be back, and he's played some decent tennis this week as well. In the women's side, Arina Sabalenka, super locked in. Arina Sabalenka, like really locked in, just looked really focused, and she beat Karolina Pliskova, who of course beat her in the semi-finals of Wimbledon last year. So there's a kind of nice symmetry to that. And Iga Świątek beat Jessica Pegula. Second set was dreadful. There were 10 breaks of serve, but Świątek played a good tie break to clinch it, and she says she's getting a little bit better every match, which is all that she asks of herself. Now, I think I haven't done a podlet since the previous night's tennis as well, which feels like about 3 years ago, but on what was supposed to be a bumper night session, and in fairness it was, albeit they maybe didn't get the winners they wanted, Coco Gauff and Nick Kyrgios both went out in the same night. Caroline Garcia played one of the best performances I've seen from a woman this year. She was imperious against Coco Gauff. She won 6-3, 6-4. She stood inside the baseline. Even on first serve, she was pretty much inside the baseline, and you have to remember that Coco Gauff has hit the second fastest serve in US Open history at this tournament, and Caroline Garcia almost stood on the baseline to her first serve and said, "Bring it on. I'll take what you've got." And on second serve, she was well inside it. And yeah, she was fabulous. Her return of serve was brilliant. There were loads of winners. I don't think Gauff played her best match. I think she felt the pressure of having Garcia doing that to her. And, she had talked beforehand about how she said she had to accept that Garcia would hit some winners, and that was okay. But I think she probably didn't necessarily mentally prepare herself for what it'd be like to not have, the safety net of her big serve, and to really have someone going after your second serve. I think she hit 6 double faults in the match, which kind of tells you that she was nervy on second serve. I think she was broken 3 times actually only in the end, but very few service games felt that comfortable. And when they did, I think it was pretty much at times when the set or the match was over. yeah, Garcia just played fabulously, and I think she has a real chance. She plays Ons Jabeur in the semi-final, someone she knows very well. They're good friends. They played against each other in juniors. And Jabeur, obviously a Grand Slam finalist already, having reached the Wimbledon final. She beat Ajla Tomljanovic, again, another really good friend. Nice that these people know each other. And yeah, she was in straight sets and played pretty well, dealt with what Ajla could throw at her and more. It'll be a fascinating mesh of styles, that one, because Jabeur all slicing and dicing, Caroline Garcia big and powerful and often flat. So interesting to see how they deal with each other. They know each other very well. If you want to head over to inews.co.uk, I interviewed Patrick Murtoglu this week, who I'm going to do a big feature with for Saturday's newspaper and online, and it'll also be part of the newsletter, which you can subscribe to. Just head to my Twitter and you'll see a thing about it. But he said that Garcia was playing like Serena. It was that style, that aggression, and that kind of refusal to take a step back that was very Serena-esque. And I did see it at the time. It was a bit like watching Serena. So fascinating to see how Garcia goes. And finally, the two men's quarterfinals on what was then Tuesday night. Casper Ruud, he played during the day and saw off Matteo Berrettini in straight sets. Berrettini not really at it, to be honest. Didn't play well. It was under the roof, which I'm not convinced favours him particularly. I think he would rather it a bit drier and cooler and, the ball flying through the air a bit quicker. But I don't know. That these things can be a bit of a wash in New York when it's so humid, roof or no roof. But, yeah, I mean, the third set, he did play better. The third set, I think, was 84 minutes long, something along those lines. And he certainly came to the party, but, he was 6-1, 5-1 down at one point because he was just absolutely nowhere, really. First serve percentage wasn't that bad, but it wasn't very effective, and Ruud just seemed able to get hold of it. I mean, Ruud's a really good returner, obviously, and has a pretty mean forehand, and he was able to keep it away from Berrettini's forehand. I think Berrettini only hit double figures winners in one of the sets. Hit 5 winners in the first set. I mean, that is, and 2 of them were aces. I mean, that is pretty wild for a guy who is an aggressive tennis player. And again, will come again. But all credit to Casper Ruud. He played very well and nullified one of the biggest serves in the game, if not the biggest. The one you might say is bigger or more effective is Nick Kyrgios. Or possibly Karen Khachanov, quite frankly, because this was 5 sets of... I hesitate to say serve bot, because I think that does them both a disservice, but the first 3 sets lasted 2 hours. I mean, we were done with the first set in 36 minutes, and it was 7-5. I mean, it was crazy. And it wasn't super edifying. Not many games... I mean, not a single game except the last one in the first set went beyond 30. There were no juices until the last game when Khachanov broke him kind of out of nowhere. And the second set, I think there was 1 juice. I mean, I know you don't want to go juice ad forever, but it was not super interesting to watch. I think most people would agree with that. And yeah, I didn't love it, if I'm quite honest. But it did eventually kind of, it's a bit like the first few rounds of a heavyweight boxing contest. They kind of felt each other out. And it did eventually, and Nick kind of eventually picked up the crowd, picked himself up. He was very flat in the early stages. I think he said afterwards he was pretty knackered, and I thought that at the time he looked pretty tired. And, he said at Wimbledon that he was exhausted at the end of it, and it is hard. These Grand Slams are hard. It's not just the physical, it's the mental. You're there for most of the time. If you're into the second week, you've already been in New York 2 weeks, because you probably got there a week before the tournament. And you've had a week of build-up and talking about it and the expectation, and then you've got trying to navigate your way through the draw, and then you've got to play the biggest match of your life, and that is tiring. And I think that got to Kyrgios a bit. He's talked a lot about being away from home for a long time as well, and he was just, trying to stay with it. That was what the guys in his box were just saying. Just stay with it, mate. Stay in it. Keep going. You'll get him. Because he was getting so frustrated that he wasn't breaking Khachanov when he wanted to or when he had the opportunity to do, which was extremely rare. And, he was sat on his chair at the end of the third set, 2-1 down, just screaming at his box, saying, don't know what a break point is. It's sad. Don't even know what a break point is. It's embarrassing. I think what he meant was that he had failed to break Khachanov, having had opportunities to do so, and he hadn't converted them. In the first game of the third set, he had 2 break points, and in fairness, Khachanov served incredibly well on break point. Those 2 break points, there was an ace out wide, and then there was an on-return serve out wide, and you couldn't really fault it, to be honest. The guy did serve really well, and he's going to be hard to beat. I mean, Ruud will take a lot from the fact that he's beaten Berrettini, and so when Khachanov turns up having hit 30 aces in the previous match, he will think, well, I've beaten Berrettini. What have you got? I think Berrettini's a better player than Khachanov as well, so I think Ruud will take a lot and will fancy a second Grand Slam final of the summer. Kyrgios, meanwhile, kind of walks away, and he said he was devastated. He was heartbroken. He did give Karen some credit. He said he's a fighter, a warrior, probably the best server I've played all tournament. I mean, I think there's no question of that. Because I'm trying to think, I don't think Kyrgios has played realistically anyone else who would. I mean, Medvedev, I suppose, and Kokinaki's got a pretty decent serve, but yeah, I mean, Medvedev didn't serve well against Kyrgios, and fair enough, Kyrgios returned like a beast that night. But yeah, he was obviously gutted. And, he said, I think what a lot of people think, which is that no one cares how you do at tournaments outside of Grand Slams, and no one even cares if you go to a Grand Slam and improve on your career best or get to the quarterfinal having never got there before. You either win it or you don't. And I think that is a little bit absolutist and a bit fatalist of him, but yeah, it's basically it. If you want to talk about getting outside the tennis bubble, which I've tried to talk about this week on Twitter a lot, and not everyone has agreed, then that's it. You've got to win a Grand Slam. That's how you get people to know who you are. Kyrgios obviously has done that without winning a Grand Slam, but he's done it for a long time, and he's one of the most entertaining players on the planet. But when it comes to results, people will look at that and go, well, you've not won a Slam, So what? You've had a lovely career. It's been fun to watch you, mate, but what's the difference between you and Joe Wilfried Tsonga? Which I know is not an insult, because Joe Wilfried Tsonga's a great guy, but that's the reality of it. You've got to go win a Slam. And that is now what 4 men who've never done it before have in front of them. They're going to try and go and win a Slam. Karen Khachanov against Casper Ruud, and Carlos Alcaraz against Francis Tiafoe. If I had to pick one, I'd say Alcaraz. It's kind of obvious, but I think he will be able to withstand the fabulous atmosphere that will result from the match against Tiafoe, and I think he will enjoy the pressure, and I think he will feel like he's been there before, which I appreciate doesn't make a lot of sense because he's not been there before. Not, in a semi-final, that is. But he's been in big matches, and he's been in big atmospheres, and he seems to relish it. So I think that'll serve him well. As for Francis Tiafoe, I mean, hell, it'd be an amazing story if he won the US Open. And it would be great for tennis, especially in America. It'd be great for, tennis's greatest ever black player. I mean, greatest ever player, but also the fact Serena is a black woman has been massive for black women everywhere, and I think black people everywhere, who have all of a sudden looked at tennis and felt that they belonged. If Francis Tiafoe then went and won the Grand Slam that she retired in, there would be an amazing symmetry there and a continuation of that message. People often talk about the Tiger Woods factor and how that didn't have the effect on golf that people thought it would. I think the Serena Williams effect has existed, and multiple players have talked about that. And Tiafoe, I think, would be a continuation of that. So that would be an amazing story. Alcaraz would be an amazing story. Casper Ruud would be a good story, having lost the French Open final earlier this summer. Great. I think Scandinavia is an area of the world that's produced so many great players, and we haven't had much success from there in recent years, so there'd be something to that. And if Karen Khachanov wins it's going to be controversial because he's Russian, and it'll be a bit embarrassing for various people. Lots of other people will think it's sort of justice, and there's a big story there as well. So 4 pretty interesting stories brewing, one way or another, out the US Open. I mean, I suppose I'm a journalist. I'm supposed to find an interesting story no matter what, right? So I'll make it work. Don't worry, lads. And then tonight, Caroline Garcia against Ons Jabeur, Iga Swiatek against Serena Sabalenka. Hard not to back Iga Swiatek at the moment, but I don't think she's playing brilliantly. And if Sabalenka plays like she did against Pliskova, Swiatek will have to work bloody hard. And as for Garcia and Jabeur, they're both in great form. And they'll be on first, which I think is an advantage. You know exactly when you're going to start. You don't have to get too nervous about it. I think that'll favour Garcia because it's her first time. Albeit she's very level-headed and she didn't seem remotely nervous against Coco Gauff. But this is different now. There's expectation on her, I think. Against Gauff, she was the underdog. You know, she wasn't the crowd favourite by any stretch. You can just go out there and swing. This might be a little bit different, but we'll see how she goes. I'll hopefully get Calvin and George on a little bit later in the week, probably to preview the 2 finals. In the meantime, thanks very much for listening, and make sure you come back next time.
Sports Social Podcast Network.